Hey, everybody. PBSC podcast hosts Mark and Steve here with a special message about our revolutionary online recovery program for addict spouses and couples called Dare to Connect. Multiple times every week, we get messages from subscribers in the program. They're people just like you. They're trying to heal from the devastation of sex and porn addiction and betrayal trauma. And here's a few of our most recent submissions. Here's one from an addict in recovery. It says, D2C has principles that everyone should utilize regardless of their circumstances. It doesn't matter your coping mechanisms. It matters that you want to work towards genuine connection with your partner.
That's awesome. Another testimony from an addict continues on. My wife is just starting out in training as a licensed therapist. Dare to Connect has been far more useful to her than her degree.
Wow.
The way Mark and Steve apply what they've learned is always so redemptive. D2C has opened doors for my relationship that I thought would be shut forever. Mark and Steve are an incredible resource of information on the subject of sex addiction and betrayal trauma. We could not do this journey without their help.
Here's one from a partner who's been with us for nearly a year. I want you both to know that it is because of you guys and D2C that I'm able to be in the place that I am today. I will always be grateful to you both for your feedback and prompt replies to my questions. I can't even come close to putting it into words how valuable my time spent with y'all this past year has been to my life. Thank you for everything you taught me about betrayal trauma and boundaries and thinking errors and loving myself and making myself a priority and standing up for myself.
Love that submission. And then as we close out here today, guys, one more account from another addict in recovery. I wish I had a platform like this 14 years ago where I could have learned and done the hard work of recovery before I had done all this damage to myself and to my spouse. And to be candid with all of you, that's exactly why we created Dare to Connect. Mark and I found ourselves in that place. Messages like these and the others like them, they're what Dare to Connect really is all about, guys, and why Mark and I do what we do. Whether you're an addict or a partner of an addict, and no matter where you find yourself in the recovery process, Dare to Connect can take you to the next level. Don't wait another day to catapult your recovery forward. Today is your day for change. Visit us at daretoconnectnow.com to pick up your free 2-week trial of Dare to Connect today. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the PBSC podcast. Steve Moore and Mark Castleman here with episode 318. For those who are on YouTube, you'll see it's a little bit different. Mark is out and about today. His internet provider, who shall remain nameless, has been giving him some challenges the last few days. So
let's just say a gigantic global company bought out my local internet provider, which has ended up in a disaster.
Yep.
We shall not name names.
So for those on YouTube watching the actual video of this on our PBSC podcast YouTube channel, Mark is all casual today, which is weird. But anyway, it's great to be with all of you. We have an interesting episode planned for today. We received a submission from a partner that was a little bit different than something outside the ordinary of what we often get. She is in a relationship and has been married for 15 years to what now identifies as a sexually addicted partner, although he didn't at first. But as you can see from the title of the podcast, this definitely is a different tack than we might typically take, and not your typical submission. But it is important to talk about. And the title is as follows: Can just looking, quote unquote, destroy a marriage? Understanding visual sexual addiction without orgasm. So obviously a little bit different. Most of us, when we think about sexual addiction, even those who are familiar with the topic, like those of you who are listeners or in your own recovery or whatnot, usually, even in the Patrick Carnes cycle of addiction, right? Acting out is step 3 out of 4 in that very basic cycle. And so most of us equate those terms not synonymously, but as an essential component. And we're going to talk about that essentialness here because I think we would argue that regardless, to some degree, remains an essential component. But we did want to talk about, based on this partner submission, the at least potential for that becoming less of a prominent element of the addiction cycle, with other parts being more emphasized and some of what that means. And so we'll just give you a quick background. So, like as I mentioned, this coupleship, they've been married for 15 years. She found the PVC podcast after a major disclosure 5 months ago. She essentially caught him acting out, and that acting out looked like she caught him looking at pornography. He initially went through multiple stages of denial, saying that this was the first. At first, she actually said he denied even looking at pornography. That what she saw, it's kind of like that scene with the penguins out of crap. I can't remember the one movie with the zebra and the tiger and the zoo ant, Zootopia, where the 4 penguins are like, you didn't see anything. He kind of tried to pull that with her.
You didn't see anything. Yeah.
And then eventually he owned the fact that he did look at pornography, and then weeks later actually owned that he actually had masturbated. So it was a very traumatic, drawn out disclosure, and that's where this all began. She says after that, she began listening, found our podcast, and that really gave her a lot of insight into helping her survive in the marriage, and we appreciate that kind compliment. But the relationship has this pattern that began with that, and she goes on to elaborate a little bit about that. Early on in the relationship, there were times where she'd discover him watching porn via browser history. He'd deny it, then he'd trickle-truth it, kind of like what we talked about, then follow immediately after a period of days or weeks with, I'm never going to do this again. And early on, this really did function in as many of you can relate, into established pattern of many things, including lying, partial admissions, and delayed truth. Right. So a really traumatic trickle disclosure kind of waltz began to form in this relationship. These behaviors continued over the years, and as she says that they began to escalate even more so, especially over the last 5 or the last half a decade or so. And that included multiple sexual behaviors, including searching for women on various social media platforms and thread forum discussion groups, trying to get modifications for video games that had a sexual nature to them, all sorts of things. And each time she would find these things out, it followed the same pattern: denial and gaslighting, claims it was accidental or didn't happen. He'd eventually admit to the behavior and then promise that it would, quote unquote, the last time. Also infused in there that the only times he'd done it most of the time were the times that she had magically caught him. I'm not trying to insert any sarcasm in there, but you can hear some suspect in our voices as we talk about this.
Yeah.
Obviously, this has had a profound impact on her, as most of you can relate to. And we talk about that quite a bit, so we're not going to cover that much now, but your typical betrayal trauma symptoms. She's become very irritable, extremely hypervigilant. She has a lot of regret for participating in sexual acts that she now feels disgusted by. She compromised her own values in that process, trying to, compete with the addiction or try to connect with him despite it. She blames herself a lot of the time for the relationship issues. And on top of that, of course, to, add whipped cream to the top of this dysfunctional sundae, he has heaped the blame on her as well and kind of leaned into that. Eventually they hit a crisis point about 5 months ago. She caught him acting out again. This is where she really hit rock bottom. She took off her wedding rings and she spent weeks basically considering being done. And they kind of were in a really tenterhook state. She then demanded to know everything. He, at the time, claimed to tell her everything at the time. Obviously, that was very traumatic. Still more trickle-truths occurred. And then we'll fast forward for sake of time to where that brings us today. The husband now claims he's in recovery. He is attending SAA meetings regularly. He's listened to every PBSC podcast episode, according to her, and he claims sobriety since disclosure. Where this gets interesting and differs from the typical story, not that any of your stories are typical, and we know that they're not, so we don't mean to sound flippant with it. But where this gets interesting and differs is that he still maintains the claim that despite everything he has shared, he has masturbated to porn only twice during this entire time. Once was early on in the relationship when he was caught by her. So she caught him that one time, and then once during a period where there wasn't much sex in their marriage. And he still insists to this day that that is all that has happened. They're now working on doing a formal disclosure with two separate therapists and arranging for a polygraph with that. And he just, there's more to it than that, but more or less, her core questions are the following. How could visual sexual behavior alone become addictive without masturbation or orgasm? So how would looking or browsing or voyeuring or scanning itself become its own standalone issue? And is that even an issue? Is that even possible? If addiction is tied to orgasm, sexual release, how could just looking be so powerful? Right? If that's so ingrained in the addictive process, how could this even happen? And why does this feel more painful than masturbation for me, especially regarding comparison and inferiority? She talks quite a bit about that, how in her submission, she actually talks about, I'd rather he was just using porn to get off. But the fact that he is basically spending all of his time looking at other women and really emphasizing on that and not even pursuing the sexual release brings about a unique insecurity for her. She feels like she's constantly being compared all the time in a very literal sense. And it's really opened up a lot of insecurities, resentments, fears for her. And that's what she's wanting us to explore a bit.
Yeah. And, like we said, over the last couple of months, we've done a number of podcasts about the very brutal impact of betrayal trauma, of integrity abuse. And so we're not going to cover that in this podcast. Please go back and look at those. We've done a number of them. But our hearts go out to this partner. What this guy has created just has horrific fallout for this betrayed partner. Yes. She finds herself in chronic hypervigilance. She feels abandoned. She feels her identity being eroded away. She finds herself being, obsessed with his behaviors, what he's doing or not doing. She's just lost any joy or interest in life itself. Even physical illness and mystery symptoms, sexual behaviors, driven by fear, not desire. There's just all of this that's going on for her. And we want to absolutely validate that. Well, let's look into answering some specific questions that she asked. And we're going to look at this first part. Why just looking, in quotes, just looking can be addictive. And so we want to talk about that for a minute. First of all, we want to say that addiction is not just about orgasm. Now, sexual climax that's attached to any behaviors reinforce those behaviors. My original mentor taught me in the early days. He said, Mark, be very, very careful what you climax to unless you want that behavior to become a permanent part of your life. Right, because the neurobiological chemical release, the overwhelming way that climax impacts the brain and the nervous system, whatever behavior you're engaging with at the same time, it's reinforcement at the highest level imaginable. But can addiction exist without that? The answer is absolutely yes, because addiction's not just about a massive dopamine release. It's also about lots of other things: novelty, entitlement, escape, avoidance, fantasy. Right? There's lots of components, especially with regard to sexual addiction, with voyeurism, with scanning, with all of the things that could be pulled into this category. And one of the things that Steve and I can't do today in this podcast is explain to all of you listening all of the nuances and intricacies that can exist with addiction and obsessive behaviors. They're so numerous and so varied and so complex. With each person, we wouldn't even make the attempt, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Right? There are some basic foundational things that normally usually apply, but addiction, there's a reason we call addiction a state of insanity, because what's possible within that mindset is massive. But maybe we can talk about just some parts of this. Could addiction exist without masturbation, as she's asking?
Well, and so, yeah, so this first part of the podcast is going to be exploring the possibilities of this, and then we'll give some thoughts at the end of this specific situation. But I mean, it is important to acknowledge that, addiction, obviously acting out is a key part of addiction. And in this case, that would be sexual release as recognized as the climax of that. But addiction by no means is specifically about the high itself exclusively. Although that does play a role, I think, in anybody's addiction, whatever that may be it chemical or substance or whatever. There are lots of components that go into it. And even when you start to look at for example, in the case of sexual addiction, an orgasm itself, and you start to look at the why behind the why, right, that becomes a very critical discussion. One of the things that we were just doing recently in Dare to Connect in an addict session for our Dare to Connect program for addict spouses and couples is we had a very in-depth discussion. The videos are still posted now. If you are a member of Dare to Connect or join daretoconnectnow.com, you can grab a 2-week free trial of that. You can still see the videos and the diagrams for it, but we explore what is in that video, what is quote unquote behind the orgasm, right? Because obviously orgasms are a chemically and viscerally and emotionally pleasurable experience, but when you start to break down what they represent, that becomes very unique to each individual. Behind the dopamine, behind the oxytocin, behind the chemical release itself, right? What does it signify? It can be anything from validation to feeling enough, to feeling in control, to feeling desired or wanted, or any myriad of other things. And the behaviors that lead up to an orgasm are in many cases of themselves, call them a side addiction, right? If you want, I don't know if that's a technically accurate term, but it's very common. For example, if we just used as one example, the thrill component, right? Of addiction and the dopamine spikes that can occur with that. I mean, I remember back in my addiction days, there being a thrill element to it. There was a compelling component to thinking that I had this secret that nobody knew about, right? And I had the ability to be Dr. Jekyll by day and Mr. Hyde by night, or if it's reversed, I can't remember, right? There was a real component and a feeling of control. And for somebody whose world is governed by a lack of control, ergo a guy living in addiction and codependency, that can be very luring and very addicting all on its own.
Well, and in our D2C program, for example, we drilled down a really deep dive on parts of the cycle that occurs before we ever reach climax.
Yeah.
There's a whole preoccupation phase. There's a ritualization phase. These can take hours, days, weeks, months. Steve and I actually used an example of a guy we knew who was a client. His preoccupation and ritualization was a year.
He would go on a long business trip once a year that he planned, where the sexual release would happen over the course of a week. The rest of the addiction cycle, all other 3 3/4 steps of it, and the whole element of the addiction funnel that we talk about in D2C, which is another way of looking at the addiction cycle, all of that was encapsulated by the other 358 days of the year.
Yeah, because and the other thing to keep in mind, this huge chemical release in the brain and nervous system doesn't just happen at climax. The dopamine, norepinephrine, endorphins, adrenaline, testosterone, and many more chemicals we could name, these are all releasing in the process leading up to climax. So anticipation, the novelty, the scanning, visual hunting, we call it. Even the fear that I could be caught in this process, that fear component, the risk factor, releases huge amounts of chemicals in the brain and nervous system. So addiction is about a whole lot more than just the orgasmic climax. And especially the visual part, visual sexual behavior, as we talk about, trains the brain. It seeks stimulation. The visual component dissociates from emotional intimacy, right? I get all the sugary rewards of this visual stimulation without having to risk all of the mental, spiritual, emotional intimacy in a real relationship. I can skip the whole meal and go straight to dessert. This retrains the brain in some really powerful ways. It's objectification without engagement. I remember, Steve, in fact, in my deep addiction years, this is what we call edging, edging without orgasm. The more I could extend that state of addictive mindset before climax, I could do that for hours or even days with all these visual edging behaviors that got right to the edge of orgasm, but didn't quite get there. And you could extend that out for long periods of time.
Sure.
Right? Bathing yourself in all these chemicals.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and there's a lot of elements to this that are important. The big thing to emphasize is that yes, it is. So to begin answering some of the questions that this partner has, and that maybe some of you listening have, it is possible to not use porn to quote unquote just get off, right? One can become very fascinated, entranced by, caught up with, and emphasized or deeply rooted in using people as objects to regulate one's own internal states, right? Because addiction at a core level is all about medication, escape, numbing out, compensation for, and can orgasm do that? Yes, but so can other elements of the addiction as well.
Hey everybody, PBSC podcast hosts Mark and Steve here with a special message about our revolutionary online recovery program for addict spouses and couples called Dare to Connect. Multiple times every week, we get messages from subscribers in the program. They're people just like you. They're trying to heal from the devastation of sex and porn addiction and betrayal trauma. And here's a few of our most recent submissions. Here's one from an addict in recovery. It says, D2C has principles that everyone should utilize regardless of their circumstances. It doesn't matter your coping mechanisms. It matters that you want to work towards genuine connection with your partner.
That's awesome. Another testimony from an addict continues on. My wife is just starting out in training as a licensed therapist. Dare to Connect has been far more useful to her than her degree.
Wow.
The way Mark and Steve apply what they've learned is always so redemptive. D2C has opened doors for my relationship that I thought would be shut forever. Mark and Steve are an incredible resource of information on the subject of sex addiction and betrayal trauma. We could not do this journey without their help.
Here's one from a partner who's been with us for nearly a year. I want you both to know that it is because of you guys and D2C that I'm able to be in the place that I am today. I will always be grateful to you both for your feedback and prompt replies to my questions. I can't even come close to putting it into words how valuable my time spent with y'all this past year has been to my life. Thank you for everything you taught me about betrayal trauma and boundaries and thinking errors and loving myself and making myself a priority and standing up for myself.
Love that submission. And then as we close out here today, guys, one more account from another addict in recovery. I wish I had a platform like this 14 years ago where I could have learned and done the hard work of recovery before I had done all this damage to myself and to my spouse. And to be candid with all of you, that's exactly why we created Dare to Connect. Mark and I found ourselves in that place. Messages like these and the others like them, they're what Dare to Connect really is all about, guys, and why Mark and I do what we do. Whether you're an addict or a partner of an addict, and no matter where you find yourself in the recovery process, Dare to Connect can take you to the next level. Don't wait another day to catapult your recovery forward. Today is your day for change. Visit us at daretoconnectnow.com to pick up your free 2-week trial of Dare to Connect today. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, and she asks it's a very visceral, heartbreaking question. She says, why does this scanning thing where he can engage in all of these voyeuristic scanning, objectifying behaviors and then not masturbate as he claims, why does that hurt me more than if he had reached climax? And that's how I don't know if we've ever had a partner ask that question in quite that way, but it's a really important thing for us to address because, Steve, you and I have had partners address that they could almost understand him trying to get to the place of climax through all of this, but just enjoying looking for the sake of looking, that hurts at a really deep level.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I've worked with many partners over the years, and one of the things that I've heard commonly, and this is a different scenario, but I do feel pretty confident saying that this hits at least along a similar vein. I've had more than one partner over the years tell me who have been through, for example, an affair where he had like a fling with somebody, where as well as partners whose addict partners have been found engaging in emotional affairs, and in some cases both. And the consensus that I oftentimes hear, not all the time, but oftentimes that I hear from partners, is that the emotional element does hurt far more than the
Mm-hmm.
physical release. Even though
Mm-hmm.
obviously neither one is okay. I want to be clear about that. There is that element of, well, the emotional attachment I do find more disturbing. I find it more unsettling. I find it more difficult to process. And I think it hits along a very similar vein of what we're talking about here. Because one is leading more towards quote unquote that orgasm or getting off or whatever you want to term it. While the other one is an actual connection, it's an exploration, right? It is a comparison. It's all of those things.
Yeah, yeah. She said
Um,
mechanical, but she said if it's him constantly looking and voyeuring and measuring and objectifying, she said that sounds like that's about his preference and then comparing all of them to her.
yeah.
Preference and comparison. She said his, if it's just looking, she said it feels more personal.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's important for every partner to know, and this is not the first time we've talked about this, but when an addict is pursuing their drug, that has very little, if anything, to do in every case that we examine, inevitably, with a comparison between beauty, youth, or worth, and much more to do about the addict mindset, which is about what? Escaping and absconding responsibility, avoiding any sort of vulnerability or legitimacy, and maintaining entitlement. But also, in addition to that, keeping up appearances at all cost in connection with just being able to, even though we say escape responsibility, as an addict in long-term recovery, successful recovery, I would tell you it's just about escape.
Just escape, avoid.
Not even
In fact,
responsibility, just escape. It's going to Neverland. I'm Peter Pan and I get to be in Neverland for a while.
so much of what she described about this guy sounded like what we experienced in ourselves and see with virtually every guy
Yes.
we work with. It's a 13 or 14 or 15-year-old kid living in a 40 or 50 or 60-year-old man's body.
He literally never grew
He
up.
never grew up. He never left Neverworld,
Yeah.
right? Because this maintaining of male sexual entitlement that he was taught when he was a kid means I get access to all these women around me, all these people, either physically or online or on my phone or wherever. I get to undress them and access their bodies without any effort or commitment on my part whatsoever.
Mhm.
That's the mindset of a 13-year-old. And that's what this absolutely sounds like, just what we've seen so much, even in ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and this brings up an important question, right? So getting to the nuts and bolts of this as we start to wrap up, how could he quote unquote be sober for 10 years? Right.
Mm.
Well, first of all, there was a term that I heard early on in my recovery. I remember a guy coming to a 12-step meeting that I was in attendance one day, and he said it perfectly. I am sober, but I'm not well.
I'm sober, but I'm not. And should we talk about what sober means?
Yes. I mean,
So
quickly,
when
because
this guy
it is
when
subjective,
this
but we
when
have
this
object.
guy yeah,
Yeah,
when
go
this guy
ahead.
says I was sober for 10 years, well, does that mean you just didn't masturbate for 10 years? During those 10 years, were you scanning in public? Were you undressing women in your mind? Did you have any fantasy whatsoever?
And yes, he
What
absolutely did. He has
Of
admitted
course
to
he,
that.
yeah,
Yes.
so he wasn't, quote, sober for 10 years. Now, could he have gone without masturbating for 10 years? Possibly.
Which in many circles, for example, the Sexaholics Anonymous is the core definition of sobriety. Yes. But again, there's a difference between being sober and being in recovery. There's a difference between not acting out and choosing a relationship. There's a difference between abstaining from a behavior and choosing connection. There's a difference between seeing how close you can drive your truck to the edge of the cliff versus hugging the side because you value the people in your life that depend and connect with you. Right?
Well, and
There's
the things she said, Steve, that was very telling to me, and we obviously only have her submission, so we don't know. But she did express how she, in order to placate him, connect with him, help him not to choose so many bad behaviors, she had given herself over to sexual acts with him that she felt ashamed of later, that she felt that she
Yeah.
betrayed herself. If this couple, for example, were engaging in multiple episodes of sex on a weekly basis, we've had clients commonly that are having 4, 5, 6 sexual encounters a week. He may have been using his partner as his masturbation substitute. I mean, can I just be bold and blunt for a second? I had a colleague, a psychologist colleague, many years ago, and he put it as bluntly as I've ever heard it put. He said, Mark, a lot of guys in addiction, they use their wives as a masturbatory substitute, and it's just masturbation inside a vagina.
Mm.
Now, I
Yeah.
apologize for being so blunt with saying that, but if we're going to state things as they really are, just because I'm having sex with my wife doesn't mean that I'm not, quote, masturbating. Because there were many times that I was with my wife where I wasn't really emotionally being present, being with my inner intention. Yeah, we were being physical together, but I was someplace else. So was I using her as a way to get to climax, just like I would pornography? Yes, I was, in too many instances.
Yeah. Well, and Mark brings up a great point, and it is important for every spouse out there to hear, and this is also important, frankly, for every addict to hear. Um, I know partners in this dynamic, and she talks about this in her submission. Oftentimes, we will hear the phrase like, "At some point, I stopped being enough,"
Yeah.
or "Right, I no longer, I was sufficient until I wasn't."
Mm-hmm.
That's not true. In virtually every case. Do people evolve and change over time? Yeah, and can there be elements or factors in that in individual cases? Possibly to some small degree. But inevitably what we find out as we work with addicts, and the more we work with addicts over and have over 40 years between the two of us, in addition to our own addiction histories, is that inevitably it is the addict's approach to the relationship and their capacity to receive, their capacity to see, their capacity to connect that changes.
Yeah, she never stopped being enough, right? It was he changed.
Well, and more accurately, maybe she did stop being enough, but the reason why is because to her or to him, and this is important for every guy to hear,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't really a wife. She was a codependent crutch. And his
Mm.
reliance on her emotionally, physically, and otherwise grew to a point that it became that they hit a fork in the road that made it heavily clear and evident what had been true all along, that she cannot be his base in all things. She
Yeah.
cannot be his emotional stopgap. She cannot be his physical stopgap. She cannot be his compensator for stress. She's an independent person, not a resource to be consumed. And far too many addicts, more than they realize, to one degree or another, engage in that. Now, I know that may
Mm-hmm.
sound a little bit harsh, and some addicts may bristle at that, but I'd invite you, if you find yourself acting out an active addiction now, or if you have in the past, has that not been the case? It was definitely the case for me. I loved my wife to the very best of my ability all through my addiction years, and I can honestly say that. I can also say simultaneously that the way that I loved her sucked. Both can be true. I sucked at loving. I was doing my very best, but it was still in many ways codependent, not love. It was taking, not giving. It wasn't an interdependent relationship. It was one where I was using her in multiple ways that we don't have time to go into today as a support system to try to fill the gaps for things that I was not doing the work to fill, compensating for trauma, compensating for insecurities, compensating for all sorts of things. And sex was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to that.
Yeah. Well, one of the questions that I had those that worked with me in early addiction, where I needed to face this if I was willing to, why in my mind did my wife stop being enough?
Mm-hmm.
Not that her worth changed in her actual true self and world, but why in my mind was she no longer enough? And now I chose to go outside of our contractual sacred, relationship agreement to go seek things elsewhere. Why? That was all about me, not about her. right?
Yep.
And what changed was my coping system sucked. It was completely collapsed, right? My sexual entitlement was unchecked. And I was turning to all these voyeuristic, visual things for all sorts of reasons that had nothing to do with her. And until I was willing to face all of it on my side, I wasn't able to really see what was actually going on. Right.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
there's a key truth here. Addiction, my addiction grew and expanded as my integrity eroded away. That's what the addiction got bigger as the integrity got smaller. And that's when the love really began to just disappear from the relationship. We call it integrity abuse for a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, guys, as I know we're getting close to wrapping up, there are so many components to this dynamic. And this episode, we hope, among other things, demonstrates the complexity behind this addiction. It's often described in the halls of 12-step, just like other addictions, as cunning, baffling, and powerful. And boy, is that the case.
Mm-hmm.
Not every situation is created the same. Not every addiction is equal, and it is rarely, if ever, productive to compare your trauma to another's as a partner. So do be mindful of that. Now, we do want to conclude at the end here, because there's the obvious kind of question in the room. What is our kind of thoughts to this situation? This one specifically. Now, we just obviously have what this partner sent us to go off of. We don't have any accounting from him. So as always, it's just that, and its opinion. This is not, we're therapists. This is not therapy. This is simply just a podcast where we give a perspective. For my part, I will say this. Is this situation possible that we've talked about today? Yeah, we've seen it before. Mark and I have talked about it this whole episode. Is it probable in more cases than not? My experience tells me no.
We only have limited information, but after
Correct.
20 plus years, each of us in this field, there are things with regard to this that don't pass the smell test.
Situations like this are more the exception than the rule. And again, that's not to say that they never happen, because they truly do. But that's not the only factor being considered here. The odds, I think, would be in the favor of more going on either way. The fact that there has been such a long and established pattern of lying and deception on the part of this guy. And again, this is no disrespect to him, because we believe what she says, that he's a really good man with some really big deficits. But there's a long-standing pattern here of lying. There's a long-standing pattern here of half-truths. There's a long pattern of staggered disclosures. And there's a long pattern of, yes, the times you magically discovered me were the only times this ever happened. So either this spouse is a Jedi master and can read virginses in the masturbation force, or something else is going on. I think that it's very fair and more than needed. I think in this case it is needed. It shouldn't be optional that they are doing a formal disclosure, which I'm glad to hear. And I think it's absolutely needed that they are doing a polygraph.
I do too.
100%. This would be a situation where if I was the therapist, you can't require anything in a disclosure situation. I'm the therapist, not the client, but I do everything short of requiring one.
Because
that absolutely is needed.
There's a lot more that actually matters than whether he masturbated or not. Right? Is he truly ready to practice full honesty? We talk about it, yes. Honesty at all costs. And without it just being pressure reactive honesty. Oh, I got caught, or she took off her wedding rings and is ready to leave. I guess I'll disclose a little bit more. That's not full honest. That's integrity abuse. That's gas. Is he developing empathy for her reality? Yeah. Is he leaning in with true, genuine curiosity to come over and sit with her sit with her in her pain and acknowledge what he's done here? The absolute destruction? Is he willing to surrender his, what appears to be almost a lifetime of male sexual entitlement with this, with the scanning and the viewing and all the stuff that's visual? Or is he continuing to defend it and hide it? Right? Is he focused on her healing or his image? Yeah. His reputation? There's a lot going on here in addition to what she's asked.
I agree with Mark, because what this really boils down to is, I mean, relationships are based, as we talk about oftentimes on here, uh, is he willing and is he able to really choose her the way that he committed to?
I like
And
yeah.
And is she in a stage, given everything that's happened, to be able to find the healing to be able to receive it?
Yeah.
That's a big journey. It's not possible. We're living examples of it, but there's a lot of work involved, and I absolutely agree with Mark. To be candid, I mean, the disclosure component of this, especially on the working side of him working to rebuild trust and everything else, too many of the guys that I work with look at disclosure and say, "See, haha, the apex of my..." No, that's you starting to rebuild the building that you committed to 15 years ago. So
Yeah.
you're just getting started.
Well, and I love the question you asked. We would submit to every guy listening out there. What does it actually mean to choose your partner?
Yes.
Do you know what that means, and everything that is involved in actually choosing my partner? I mean, it's huge. Maybe we'll do a podcast on that sometime, what it means to choose your partner. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we love and appreciate all of you as always. Thank you so much for being here. Dare to Connect continues to grow. We just wrapped up our holiday promotion on January 31st, so the window for joining with that holiday promotion is now closed. But we would invite you, if you're in a place where you're looking to take your healing and recovery to the next level, we hope that you will consider the Dare to Connect program for addicts, spouses, and couples. Roughly, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, 40-ish hours, give or take, of content every month. Advanced classes and academy courses for a variety of healing needs. Live interactive sessions 3 times a week, and a support session for both addicts, one for addicts and one for partners on the weekends. Wherever you are out in recovery, Dare to Connect can level it up for you. We hope that you'll join us. You can grab a 2-week free trial of that at daretoconnectnow.com. And we hope to see you there. And if you would like to submit questions, as always, to the podcast, I think we have about a month backlog. We got quite a few submissions after the holiday lull, like we always do. But you're welcome to send those if you go to the same website, daretoconnectnow.com. Click at the PBC banner at the top of the screen, and you can send that question at the bottom in the contact form.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us once again, and we will pick things up in our next episode.
Take care, everybody.
All right, see ya.
Everything expressed on the PBSC podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants, and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.